The old man Bill. The old man Bill.
Secrets of the Free Energy of Cold Electricity. Introduction. Peter A. Lindemann.
Ever since I learned about the work of Edwin Gray, more than a quarter of a century ago, I have been trying to understand how he obtained free energy. Only recently did the necessary information become available that allowed me to finally summarize all the clues and reach a definite conclusion. In the Free Energy Secrets of Cold Electricity, I describe this 27-year odyssey and the knowledge I gained along the way. Edwin Gray discovered that the discharge of a high-voltage capacitor could be translated into a huge radiant electrostatic surge. This burst of energy was generated by his circuit and was captured by a special device that Mr. Gray called his conversion element switching tube. The non-damaging cold form of energy coming out of this conversion tube powered all of his demonstration installations, instruments, engines, and also charged his batteries. Mr. Gray called this process splitting of positive electricity. These names were incomprehensible because Gray did not reveal anything concerning the conditions under which the circuit was operated to produce this effect. It was a mystery. It wasn't until I compared what was known about Gray's work with Jerry Vassilatos's analysis, published in 1996, which detailed Nikola Tesla's experimental work in the late 1880s, that the picture began to become clearer. These experiments led to the discovery of what Tesla called radiant energy and formed the basis for the subsequent development of his amplifying transmitter. This material revealed Gray's secret, a careful comparison of Gray's cold electricity systems and Tesla's radiant energy systems led to the well-reasoned conclusion that these two discoveries were in fact one and the same. In light of this, it was finally possible to correct Gray's circuit diagram and complete all the gaps in it. I believe that this book contains enough information that anyone interested in obtaining free energy can reproduce the effects of cold electricity using fairly simple equipment. I believe that thousands of engineers and experimenters will begin to replicate the effects of this main channel of free energy. Many people have provided invaluable assistance during the course of my research, and I would like to thank them and express my gratitude. Tom Valentine, for his persistent research into the history of Edwin Gray, for his excellent and careful answers, for the unusual ways in which he obtained photographs, and for the amazing generosity with which he made his entire archive available to me. I wouldn't have discovered anything without his help. Eric Dollard, for being the first of our contemporaries to truly understand Nikola Tesla's work with pulsed discharges, and for redemonstrating this work using special apparatus. To Jerry Vassilatos, for so brilliantly explained and neatly compiled for publication the history of Tesla's discoveries, and to David Hatcher Childress, the publisher of Jerry's book, for giving me unusually broad permission to quote from it. Then, to Bruce De Palma, for teaching me how to think about physics the way things really exist. Trevor Constable, for disabusing me of any confusion regarding the existence of the ether, and for his tireless efforts in its practical application for the benefit of mankind. Tom Brown, for introducing me to many of these people, and for expanding the horizon of my knowledge in countless areas. Allison Davidson, for permission to reproduce here a color photograph of an etheric discharge in an amplifying transmitter by Eric Dollard, taken from Integration Magazine, Summer 1986 issue. Dorothy O'Connor and Jacqueline Lindemann, for their contributions to the editing of this book. And finally, of course, to Edwin Vincent Gray Sr. and Dr. Nikola Tesla, who discovered this amazing technology.
Peter A. Lindemann, Ph.D., December 2000.
When the great truth is suddenly discovered and experimentally confirmed that this planet, with all its awesome immensity of electrical charges, is in fact scarcely more than a small metal ball, and when from this will follow vast possibilities, each of which is amazing and has innumerable uses that will be fully exploited. When the first plan is adopted, and it shows that a telegraphic message is almost as secret and undetectable as a thought, and can be transmitted to any distance, when the sound of the human voice with all its intonation and expression will be accurately and instantly reproduced anywhere on the globe, when the energy of falling water is available to provide light, heat, and movement everywhere, on the sea, on land, or high in the air, then humanity will be like a torn-up anthill. Everything will be in turmoil.
Nikola Tesla, 1904. Chapter 1. The Mystery of Edwin Gray.
My interest in free energy began in the summer of 1973, when I first read the National Tatler, article by journalist Tom Valentine Figg. One first article from National Tatler was entitled as follows: "Inventor creates an engine that does not consume fuel." This invention could change history since 1984. Although I was young and impressionable, I had never seen a headline like this before. The article began with the following words: "A California inventor has found a way to produce unlimited amounts of electrical energy without using fuel, potentially the greatest discovery in human history. Edwin Gray Sr., 48, has created working devices that can forever power any car, train, truck, or boat, and the airplane in this country, to heat, cool, and service every American home without laying transmission lines, to supply an endless amount of power to the nation's mighty industrial system forever and ever, all without breaking a sweat." Environmental pollution. After several paragraphs about capital growth and job creation, the article described two very interesting tests that the author, in the company of several scientists, had witnessed in Gray's laboratory, which was located in Van Nuys, California. Tatler received a complete demonstration of impossible but real Gray's methods for using electricity. The first demonstration showed Gray using an entirely different form of electrical charge, a powerful but cold form of energy. A 6-volt car battery rested on the table. Connecting wires ran from the battery to a bank of capacitors that are the key to Gray's discovery. The whole system was attached to 2 electromagnets, each weighing 570 G. Now, if you try to connect these 2 magnets from that battery and do what I'm going to do with them, you will drain the battery in 30 minutes, and the magnets will become extremely hot, Gray explained. Look what happens. When Fritz Lenz connected the battery, the voltmeter needle gradually reached the 3,000 volt mark. At that moment, Gray closed the switch, and there was a loud bang. The top magnet shot into the air with great force and was caught by Richard Hackenberger. A terrifying jolt of electricity sent the top magnet flying more than 2 feet into the air. But the magnet remained cold. "The amazing thing," said Hackenberger, "is that only 1% of the energy was used. 99% went back into the battery." Gray explained, "The battery can last a long time because most of the energy is returned to it. The secret to this process lies in the capacitors and the ability to separate positive electricity." When Gray said, "separate positive electricity," the faces of the 2 famous physicists stretched out in bewilderment. Normally, electricity consists of positive and negative particles, but Gray's system allows you to use only one of them separately and with high efficiency. Tom Valentine then explained the second demonstration shown on Figg. To Edwin Gray demonstrates his chain. Gray showed the Tatler reporter a small 15-amp-hour motorcycle battery. It was connected to a pair of his capacitors, which in turn were connected to a panel on which the electrical sockets were mounted. He pressed the switch, and the tiny battery sent a charge to the capacitors. He then plugged in 6 15-watt light bulbs on separate wires, a 110-volt portable television, and 2 radios. The lights were bright, the TV was working, both radios were talking, but the small battery was not draining. You wouldn't be able to get the same amount of current out of this battery under normal circumstances, Gray said. "This is the most amazing thing I have ever seen," exclaimed K.V. Wood, Jr., president of McCulloch Oil Corporation, who was also present at the demonstration. He started looking for hidden sockets on the walls. "I can prove that the power is not coming from other outlets," Gray suggested. He took a 40-watt light bulb on a regular extension socket and connected it to a panel powered by his system. You can see what happened next on Fig. 3 Tom Valentine, with a cold, glowing lamp in water. The light bulb lit up, and then Gray threw it into a cylinder of water. What would have happened if ordinary energy had been used here? Gray asked, and plunged his hand into the water in which the light bulb was glowing. You would have been electrocuted. There would have been a pop and a hiss, and it would continue as long as at least one of your fingers touched the water. But there is no shock. "Gentlemen, this is a new manifestation of electricity," said Hackenberger. "This was perhaps the most amazing article I have read in the newspapers. I was completely engrossed in this." A few weeks later, I found the second article in the series. "Fuelless Electric Miracle Could Save $35 billion a year in gas prices." Figure 4 second article from the National Tatler. It talked about an amazing new type of electric motor that was powered by Gray's system. The silent, non-polluting electromagnetic motor recovers the energy expended in it and can operate indefinitely. Gray's prototype runs on 4 6-volt batteries, which are more likely to wear out than they will be discharged. The same repelling magnets on cold energy located on the rotor activate engine. Hackenberger, an electronics specialist, explains, "Our circuit produces a series of high-voltage pulses of energy. These portions of energy are transferred to a control device, which acts as an ignition distributor in an internal combustion engine. Each time the magnet is charged, most of the energy is returned back to the battery without loss." Around the same time, another article appeared in the magazine, Check the Unknown. The article was called "The Motor That Powers Itself" by Jack Scagnetti, provided much of the same information that was contained in Tom Valentine's articles, explaining the principle of his motor in the same way as the return of energy from light bulbs. Richard Hackenberger, Vice President of Engineering at EVG Ray, explains how an electromagnetic motor works. The energy from the high-voltage section, moving through the electrical circuit system, produces a series of high-voltage energy emissions. The emissions are transmitted to the control unit, which operates the main engine in turn. When this happens, the regenerating system recharges the battery with pulses of 60 to 120 amps. These articles have completely captured my imagination. Shortly thereafter, my brother and I wrote to A.V. Gray Enterprises, Van Nuys, California, expressing our interest and wanting more information. I received the following letter in October 1973. "Dear Mr. Lindemann, I am pleased to thank you for your great interest in E.V. Gray Enterprises, Inc., and for the time you took to write to us. I also sent a letter to your brother, but following our privacy policy, we cannot provide you with information about our engine or company. Needless to say, it was quite discouraging. So I reluctantly put Valentine's and Scagnetti's articles, along with the letter from E.V. Gray, into a folder that suddenly grew into my very long research on the topic of free energy. Unfortunately, I didn't see any articles about Ed Gray for the next couple of years. In 1977, however, I found another article by Tom Valentine in an issue of Newsreel magazine about classified research. Valentine wrote about various technologies, from extracting oil from coal to making gasoline from water, about planes that don't crash, and other amazing research. The article also included a story about Edwin Gray under the heading EMC, the electronic energy that could change the picture of the global energy economy. Figure 5 article in Newsreel magazine. In this article, Ed Gray said,
I remember getting an electric shock when I picked up a charged capacitor from a workbench. The incident still haunted me. Then I saw government officials testing the first radar on the Potomac River. I remember, as one of the scientists explained the principle of its operation, a pulse is released, a pulse returns, and I was always interested in thunderstorms. I noticed how much more powerful they become as they approach the ground. This process is somehow influenced by a larger amount of air. These three principles, and also top-secret methods for producing and mixing static electricity, form the basis of Gray's electric motor.
Further in the same article, there is no other engine like this in the world, said Dr. Chalfin. Conventional electric motors use continuous current and constantly waste energy. In this system, energy is used only in a small part of a millisecond. Unused energy is returned to the additional battery for reuse. It is completely cold, Dr. Chalfin added, placing his hand on the motor. There is no energy loss in this system. Gray's first patent, issued in June 1975, was entitled Electric Motor, Operating on a Pulsating Capacitor Discharge. I received a copy of this patent in 1978. This rather large patent consists of 18 sheets, 19 illustrations, and 18 claims. It describes a motor that is driven by discharging capacitors through electromagnets positioned opposite each other. But I soon discovered that if you tried to make an engine according to the principles included in the patent, it would not work as described in Valentine's papers. In fact, it will not produce the cold form of electricity at all. If you get in the way of the discharge of these capacitors, you will be thrown to the other side of the room. Moreover, the amount of energy returned is not even close to what Gray talked about in the articles. It soon became clear to me that this patent protected a specific engine design, but did not show how it worked. From the very beginning, I was most interested in its solid-state circuit. I found out that the production of cold energy had nothing to do with the motor, and that the motor was only a secondary device. After all, when Gray threw magnets and turned on the TV and light bulbs, he was not using a motor. Intuitively, I knew from the very beginning that the key to unlocking the secret of Gray's discovery lay in attempting to fully understand the workings of his solid-state circuit. However, the sources I used for this were far from perfect, and by the late 70s I had absolutely all the information available on the topic. At the end of the 1980s, I had only heard rumors that Gray was continuing his work, but all I could find out was that there were no new articles or other messages about him. In the mid-1990s, however, a colleague of mine said that he had heard that Gray had received several more patents, and this intrigued me greatly. Do these patents answer the questions I was looking for? I didn't know this exactly, but I knew that I needed to have these documents. Unfortunately, my colleague did not have them, and did not know their numbers. So once again, my investigation into Ed Gray's cold electricity stalled for several more years. In June 1999, while visiting the IBM Intellectual Property Network on the Internet, now called the Delphi Intellectual Property Network, I noticed that the patent database search engine had recently been updated to allow searching by inventor name. By typing Gray into the search bar and examining every word in every patent since 1971, you will get so many results that you probably won't be able to look at them all. Now, in the updated machine, I was able to enter Gray, Edwin. And so, after 30 seconds, the numbers of the remaining 2 patents, received by Edwin Gray, appeared on my screen. I was in 7th heaven on Rice. 6 Gray's chain patent, the first of these patents, is shown, entitled Energy Enhancement Apparatus suitable for inductive loads, issued in June 1986. Understanding this patent is the basis of this book. Another patent was entitled Efficient Electrical Converter Switching Tube Designed for Inductive Loads, Figural 7 Gray's Conversion Tube Patent, and was released approximately 10 months later, in April 1987. These two patents are closely related and almost identical. One of them describes the circuit that operates the switch tube, and the other describes the tube itself. Almost 80% of the descriptions in these patents are identical. Fig E. 8 Gray circuit diagram. Shown here is the circuit diagram from the first patent. I've been looking for this diagram for 26 years, and finally I have a chance to understand what Gray was doing. I was sure that I was looking at the basis of his circuit of cold electricity. But Gray still kept his cards close to his chest. Looking at this diagram, it is not clear how these components behave, or what they do, and why. The more I studied the text, which was quite short compared to the engine patent, the more I realized that I was looking at something completely incomprehensible to me. Intuitively, I knew that I had all the pieces of the puzzle, but I still didn't know how to put them together, much less what the finished picture would look like. How can this circuit produce free energy? There was still too much that was unclear. However, I was impressed by some of the interesting references in these patents. For example, in one small paragraph, Gray points out, hidden here is an electrical control system which, in theory, converts electrical energy from a low-voltage source, such as an electric battery, into high-potential, high-current pulses that are capable of producing a force action on an inductive load more efficiently than that produced directly from the energy source. This statement may sound a little confusing, but as I found out, it was just a dodge to avoid saying the words free energy. He further states, this system achieves the result stated above by using electrostatic or pulse energy created by a high-intensity spark generated inside a specially designed electrical converter switch tube. This tube uses a low-voltage anode, a high-voltage anode, and one or more electrostatic charge-receiving grids. These grids are specially sized and arranged in a special way to fit into the tube, and therefore directly correlated with the amount of energy expected when the device is operating. The further I read into this patent, the more intrigued I became about components, NOSN 42, 44, and NUM 46. The patent states, a spark gap protection device, 42, is included in the circuit to protect the inductive load and rectifier elements from excessive discharge currents. In the event that the potentials in the circuit exceed predetermined values fixed by the mechanical size and air gap of the arrestor, the excess energy is dissipated, removed, by the protective device into the common circuit. Electrical ground. Diodes 44 and 46 remove excess energy generated during trigger switching of the converter element switching tube. So in this circuit, we see three elements, NOS 42, 44, and 46, which are specially designed to dump excess energy when this tube is lit. It follows that it is possible to produce so much energy here that it could damage the rest of the circuit. This was very promising, but I still did not understand what kind of phenomenon could create such conditions, or why. But it was absolutely clear to me that Gray was expecting something extremely huge that happens when the converter tube burns. I was convinced that I had discovered the secret of the device, but I still didn't really understand what I was seeing in front of me. I needed a Rosetta Stone, something that could translate all these mysterious writings into understandable text. Luckily, I found it. The Rosetta Stone was a book called Secrets of Cold War Technology, The HARP Project, and What Behind It, written by Jerry Vassilatos in 1996 and published by Adventures Unlimited Press. In the first chapter, entitled Nikola Tesla and Radiant Energy, Vassilatos returns to the heady days of 1890, when Nikola Tesla conducted experiments that led to the creation of a magnifying, amplifying transmitter. This is an amazing piece of work, and I recommend purchasing and reading the entire publication. However, to add to all the merits of this book, the following excerpts from the first chapter not only describe the most interesting history of the discovery, but, more importantly, provide the basis for a complete understanding of Tesla's amazing amplifying transmitter and then its connection with Edwin Gray's cold electricity circuit. Edwin Vincent Gray, 1925 to 1989. Edwin Gray was born in Washington, D.C. in 1925. There were 14 children in his family. At the age of 11, he became interested in the then-emerging field of electronics when he observed one of the first demonstrations of primitive radar on the Potomac River. At the age of 15, he left home and joined the Army, attending the Army Engineering School for 1 year until he was discharged due to the discovery of his insufficient age. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, he was reinstated in the Navy and served on the Pacific battlefield for 3 years. After the war, he worked as a mechanic and continued his research in the field of electromagnetism. After years of experimentation, he discovered how to separate positive electricity in 1958 and created the first prototype of his EMA motor in 1961. EMA Electric Magnetic Association. The third prototype of his motor was successfully tested for 32 days and then was disassembled for analysis. With these results in hand, Gray began searching for funding sources. After being rejected by all the major corporations and venture capital firms, he formed his own limited liability company in 1971. By early 1973, E.V. Gray Enterprises, Inc. had an office in Van Nuys, California, hundreds of private investors, and a new, fourth, prototype of the EMA motor. Ed Gray also received a Certificate of Excellence from Ronald Reagan, then Governor of California. In the summer of 1973, Gray conducted demonstrations of his technology that received rave reviews in the press. Later that year, he joined forces with automobile designer Paul M. Lewis to build America's first fuel-free electric car. But then trouble happened. On July 22, 1974, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office raided the offices and store of E.V. Gray Enterprises without warning and seized all business papers and working prototype engines. For 8 months, the district attorney tried to force Gray's shareholders to testify against him, but none of them agreed. Gray was unexpectedly accused of grand theft, but even this false charge was eventually dropped. In March 1976, Gray was charged with 2 minor violations of Securities and Exchange Commission regulations, but was acquitted and released. But the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office never returned the prototypes to him. Despite this, there were also positive developments. His first U.S. patent for a motor design was awarded in June 1975, and in February 1976, Gray was nominated by the Los Angeles Patent Attorneys Association for Inventor of the Year for his discovery and proof of a new form of electrical power. Despite this support, Gray received significantly less funding from this time on. At the end of the 1970s, Gray's technology was bought up by Zetec Incorporated, and E.V. Gray Enterprises ceased to exist. In the early 1980s, Gray offered his technology to the American government to implement the Reagan SDI program. He sent letters to every member of Congress, both senators and members of the House of Representatives, as well as the President, Vice President, and every member of the Cabinet. Surprisingly, in response, Gray not only did not receive a single answer, but not even a single notification that the letter had been received. During the first half of the 1980s, Gray lived in Council, Idaho, where he filed and received 2 more of his patents. In 1986, he took out a loan and bought a workshop in Grand Prairie, Texas, where he created several more new EMA motor prototypes. By 1989, he was working on applying his technology to propulsion applications and established a residence in Council, Idaho, and workshops in Council, Grand Prairie, and Sparks, Nevada. Edwin Vincent Gray died in his workshop in Sparks, Nevada, in April 1989, under mysterious circumstances. He was 64 years old and in good health.
Chapter 2. Rosetta Stone. The following chapter is excerpted from the first chapter of Jerry Vassilatos' book, Secrets of Cold War Technology, the HARP project, and what behind it, and is reproduced here courtesy of Adventures Unlimited Press.
The following chapter is excerpted from the first chapter of Jerry Vassilatos' book, Secrets of Cold War Technology, the HARP project, and what behind it, and is reproduced here courtesy of Adventures Unlimited Press. James Clerk Maxwell predicted the possibility of the existence of electromagnetic waves. In theoretical discussions conducted to better explain his theories, Maxwell asked his readers to speculate about 2 different types of electric waves that may exist in nature. The first consideration concerned longitudinal electric waves, a phenomenon that required the presence of a variable concentration of electrostatic field lines. Such a pulsation of density and discharge of electrostatic fields could arise only under the condition of the existence of a unidirectional field, the vector of which would be fixed in one direction. The only variable allowed for the generation of longitudinal waves was the field concentration. Subsequent propagation along the electrostatic field lines led to pulsating pressures of the charges, and these pulsations moved in one direction. These electric sound waves were rejected by Maxwell. He concluded that such states could not be achieved. His second reasoning concerned the existence of transverse electromagnetic waves. They required a rapid change in the electric field along a fixed axis. Electrical lines propagating through space may have had to swing back and forth under the influence of their own momentum, while at the same time moving away from their source at the speed of light. The corresponding forces, which were exact copies of the vibrations in the source, had to be detected at considerable distances. Maxwell inspired experimenters to search for such waves, suggesting possible ways to achieve the result. Thus began the great campaign for electromagnetic waves. In 1887, Heinrich Hertz announced that he had discovered electromagnetic waves, which was no small achievement for that time. In 1889, Nikola Tesla tried to reproduce Hertz's experiments. In his elegant laboratory on South Fifth Avenue, he repeated with absolute precision all the conditions of Hertz's experiment, but found that he could not obtain the effects reported. Nevertheless, the equipment produced the effects that Hertz required. Tesla began experimenting with short and powerful electrical discharges using capacitors charged to very high voltages. He discovered that with the help of such sharp discharges, it was possible to explode thin wires. Vaguely feeling that he had stumbled upon something important, Tesla abandoned these experiments, concentrating on the mystery, suspecting that Hertz had somehow mistaken electrostatic induction, or electrical shock waves in the air caused by electrical discharge, for real electromagnetic waves. In fact, Tesla even visited Hertz and personally proved his observations to Hertz, who, convinced that Tesla was right, concluded that his conclusions were correct and was willing to deviate from his thesis. Hertz was truly disappointed, and Tesla deeply regretted that he had to do this to a respected academician while proving the truth. But while continuing his own experiments to identify electrical waves, Tesla made a chance observation that forever changed the course of his experimental research. In his own attempts to understand electrical waves, where he felt that Hertz was not finding the truth. Tesla developed a powerful method by which he hoped to generate and capture real electromagnetic waves. Part of his apparatus required the use of a very powerful bank of capacitors. This capacitor bank was charged to a very high voltage and immediately discharged through a short copper bar. The resulting explosive discharges produced some phenomena that greatly impressed Tesla, as they far surpassed any electrical effect he had ever seen. There was some secret here, and he had to reveal it. The instantaneous sparks, which he called explosive discharges, were capable of vaporizing wires. They resulted in very powerful shock waves that hit him with great force over the entire surface of his body. Tesla was extremely intrigued by this amazing physical effect. More precisely, he was completely absorbed in studying these shots of extraordinary energy than electric sparks. These electrical impulses produced effects that were usually associated only with lightning. The explosive effects reminded him of similar events he had observed with high-voltage direct current generators. A familiar experience among workers and engineers occurred during the ordinary closing of the switch of a high-voltage dynamo. This often resulted in a sensitive electric shock, taken for granted, attributed to residual static charge. This dangerous condition only occurred during sudden switching on of high-voltage direct current. A corona of lethal static charge burst directly from high-voltage conductors and often found a path to the ground that included workers and operators. In long cables, this sudden charging effect produced a bristle of bluish needles emanating from the line into the surrounding space. This state occurred immediately at the moment the switch closed. The bluish, sparkling crown disappeared after a few milliseconds, along with the life of any unfortunate person it hit. After this short effect ended, the systems behaved as expected. This phenomenon disappeared when the charges slowly saturated the lines and systems. After this short flash, the currents flowed smoothly where they were intended. This effect was detrimental only in small systems, but on large regional power grids that used impressive voltages, it was lethal. People were dying from this effect, which spread its wide, lethal electrostatic corona of sparks through power system components. Although the generators were rated for several thousand volts, these mysterious surges produced voltages of hundreds of thousands, even millions of volts. The problem was solved when well-insulated and grounded relay switches were used. The engineering research carried out by that time concerned only those properties of energy systems that related to the steady state of energy production and consumption. Now it has become clear that large systems require taking into account both normal and transient operating modes when designing. Accommodation for the dangerous initial overcharge was a new feature. Research into this effect became the main goal of energy companies for many years, and fuses and spark gaps became the subject of many patents and articles. Tesla knew that the strange supercharging effect was observed only when the dynamo was connected to long transmission lines, just as in the case of his explosive capacitor discharges. Although both of these cases were completely different, they produced similar effects. The instantaneous surge provided by the dynamo appeared super-concentrated in extended lines for a short period of time. Tesla calculated that this electrostatic stress concentration was several orders of magnitude greater than any dynamo of the time could produce. The actual energy was somehow amplified or transformed. But how? Engineers concluded that this was an electrostatic blocking effect. Many believed that this was the action of charge bucking, when a powerful source was unable to transfer charge through the system quickly enough. The mystery was that the impedance of such systems seemed to affect the charge carriers before they could escape the dynamo terminals. It was like when you quickly slap your hand on water, the surface seems hard. It was the same with electric force. Charges accumulated in front of a barrier that seemed like a solid wall, but this effect only lasted during the impact. Once the charge carriers were picked up by the electric field produced, the charges jumped along the line in all directions. A short-term supercharging effect was observed during the distribution of charges, quickly filling the entire line and system. Thus, the dynamo became the site of a small shock wave. Tesla began to wonder why electrostatic fields could travel faster than charge itself. This riddle puzzled him. Was the field an entity that only served as a drive for more massive particles? If this were so, then what did the field itself consist of? Was there a field of tiny particles? More and more questions arose. Despite the amazing ideas that his research generated, Tesla also saw a practical application that he had not previously thought of. Thinking about the supercharge effect of a dynamo gave the idea for a new experimental apparatus. It greatly outperformed the capacitor bank used in attempts to detect electrical waves. The source of the electric field was a simple high-voltage direct current generator. Tesla understood that the resistance of lines or components on the side of the dynamo was an insurmountable barrier that charge carriers could not jump over. This barrier created a cumulative effect. The electrostatic charges were practically stopped and were momentarily contained by the resistance of the line. This barrier existed for a short millisecond time interval when the switch was closed. The instantaneous application of forces against this imaginary barrier compressed the charge to a density that could not be achieved using ordinary capacitors. A short application of force, the impact of particles on a resistance barrier, ultimately caused this unusual state of electrical condensation. This is why the wires in his past experiments often exploded. The analogy with steam engines was unmistakable. Large steam engines had to be started with great care. It required consultation with old and experienced operators who knew how to warm up the engine without breaking the valves, causing a deadly explosion. If started too quickly, even very large steam engines could explode. The steam had to be released into the system carefully until it smoothly and gradually filled every nozzle, line, and component. Here, too, a mysterious bushing effect was observed, where a large volume system behaved as if it had an unusually large resistance to any force applied suddenly. The academic world of experimenters was still busy with his past discovery of high-frequency alternating currents. This meant that Tesla was the only one who studied pulsed discharges. He received explosive impulses not previously observed in laboratories. Each component was carefully insulated, and he used insulated conductors and rubberized clothing to achieve complete safety. Tesla had made extensive observations of electrostatic machines capable of strongly charging insulated metal conductors, but this demonstration went beyond simply charging the conductors by suddenly closing a switch. This effect generated a jumping charge, the like of which Tesla had never observed. Whatever conditions he used for previous systems, he has now learned to maximize the effect. By balancing voltage and resistance at a constant capacitance, Tesla learned to continuously create a state of supercharge of such a force that no existing device could generate. Experimental observations showed that the usual discharge of a capacitor generated an oscillating current, which one might say darted between the plates of each capacitor until it completely spent its energy. The high voltage of the dynamo created such a powerful unidirectional pressure on the compacted particles that changing their state became impossible. The only possible solution was hesitation. In this case, the charges created a long series of movements and stops until the supercharge disappeared. Any parameters that amplified such fluctuations limited the expression of the full energetic effect of the supercharge from the energy source, and it was precisely this state that Tesla sought to achieve. Undoubtedly, he spent a huge amount of time creating various ways to block each vibration and other complex current phenomena that could hasten the supercharger's loss of its concentrated energy. He needed a single super impulse going in one direction. When all the vibrations and leaks were eliminated, new strange effects appeared. These powerful phenomena with high penetrating force have never been observed when working with high-frequency currents. The rapid closing of the switch now sent a penetrating shock wave through the laboratory, which could be felt by the sharp impact and penetrating electrical stimulation. "I'll give you an injection." The face and hands were especially sensitive to the explosive shock waves, which also produced a funny, tingling effect at close ranges. Tesla was convinced that particles of materials that reached a vaporous state literally burst out of the wires in all directions. To better study these effects, he positioned himself behind a glass screen and continued his research. Despite the screen, both the shock waves and the tingling effect continued to be felt, which puzzled the researcher a lot. This anomaly piqued his curiosity because no one had observed anything like this before. This phenomenon, stronger and more penetrating than the usual electrostatic charge of metals, literally pushed a high-voltage charge into the surrounding space, which gave rise to a tingling sensation. The injections lasted for a small fraction of a second. At the moment, the switch closed. But Tesla was convinced that these strange effects were simply due to the propagation of ionized shock waves in the air, like a highly ionized thunderclap. Tesla conducted a new series of experiments to measure the pressure of the shock wave over large distances. He used an automatic disconnect switch. When configured correctly, it became possible to obtain a more controlled repetition of the effect when turned on. In addition, it allowed for remote measurements that shed light on the phenomenon of screen penetration. Voltage control was carried out by changing the rotation speed of the high-voltage dynamo. After setting up these components, Tesla was free to move around the room and take measurements. Wanting also to avoid prolonged exposure to pressure from blows and sparks, Tesla protected himself with special materials. The application of rapidly interrupted high-voltage direct current resulted in the emission of piercing beams that could be felt at great distances from their super spark source. In fact, Tesla felt the pricks even through his special material shield. Whatever was released from the wires when the switch was closed, it easily penetrated the glass and copper screens. It seemed to make no difference what they were made of. The effect penetrated through any substance, as if there were no screen at all. Here there was clearly an electrical effect that penetrated directly through space without material intermediaries. Radiant electricity. The observed phenomenon violated the principles of electrostatic charge discovered experimentally by Faraday. Emitted electrostatic particles typically spread over the surface of the metal shield. They do not penetrate deep into the metal. The new effect had non-electrical characteristics. Tesla was genuinely intrigued by this new strange phenomenon and began to study the literature in search of references to its properties. He found no such references, except for the half-forgotten studies of two experimenters. In the first case, Joseph Henry observed the magnetization of steel needles by a powerful spark discharge. The unusual thing about this experiment, carried out in 1842, is that the Leyden jar, the sparks of which produced the magnetization, stood on the top floor of a building that is usually impenetrable to electricity. Brick walls, thick oak doors, heavy stone and iron cladding, tin ceilings. Moreover, the needles were placed under the vault of the basement. How could sparks have such an effect on needles through natural barriers? Dr. Henry was convinced that the spark created special rays similar to light, and it was these penetrating agents that were responsible for magnetization. The second such incident occurred in 1872 in a high school building in Philadelphia. Elihu Thomson, a physics teacher, was looking for a way to make the sparks from Ruhmkorff's large spark coil more visible for a lecture. Having connected one pole of the coil to a pipe of cold water, Thomson was startled by the fact that the color of the sparks changed from blue to white. Wanting to enhance this effect, Thomson connected the other pole to a large metal sheet of the table. After turning on the coil, a deafeningly crackling, dazzling white spark appeared, visible even from the back rows. Wanting to show this experiment to his colleague, Edwin Houston, Thomson approached the door and was suddenly stopped. Touching the bronze doorknob on the oak door, he received a sudden, sharp electric shock. Turning off the Ruhmkorff coil, Thomson found that the effect had ceased. After discussing what happened with Edwin, they started the device again. The stabbing effect was repeated. Then both gentlemen began to run around a huge building made of stone, oak, and iron, with electrically insulated metal objects. Each touch of a penknife or screwdriver to any metal object, regardless of the distance to the coil and the degree of insulation from the floor, generated long, continuous white sparks. The results of the study were described in a short article in Scientific American that same year. As Tesla studied each of these early observations, separated by a period of 30 years, he felt that they were similar to his discovery. Each of these cases was caused by slight variations of the same phenomenon. Quite by accident, each experimenter achieved the manifestation of the supercharge effect. In Dr. Henry's case, the explosion phenomenon manifested itself as a single flash, as an electrostatic machine was used to accumulate the initial charge. The second case was special because it showed a continuous and long-lasting supercharging phenomenon. This effect was rare because it usually required very precise electrical parameters. Tesla derived this from the simple fact that this effect was extremely rarely observed in laboratories around the world. But he was lucky to quickly notice the anomalous attributes of this phenomenon. Tesla knew that, despite the strong penetrating effect in each case, only he was able to achieve the full and maximum manifestation of supercharge. His device had no equal. It was guaranteed to be able to release the essence of the electrostatic field, which was unattainable for other devices. Although Tesla made this discovery in 1889, a preliminary review of the effect was not published until after a long series of experiments. The Dissipation of Electricity, published before Christmas 1892, was Tesla's turning point. It was from this moment that he completely abandoned research into high-frequency alternating currents. Completely moving away from field research, Tesla began to describe shock waves and other effects of pulses. In addition to those physical sensations, which he described with characteristic restraint, Tesla also drew attention to the gas aspects of the phenomenon. He discovered that the sharply charged wires in his experiments produced strange gaseous currents when immersed in an oil bath. At first, he attributed this phenomenon entirely to the gas absorbed by the conductor, but he soon discovered that this effect continued for a long time from the same wire, and no amount of ordinary absorbed gas could account for it. Definitely, in this case, currents arose in the oil, breaking off from the ends of the charged wire so strongly that they visually compressed the oil, forming cavities, sometimes up to 5 centimeters deep. Tesla began to study the true nature of the light gas escaping from the ends of the wire immersed in oil. He prepared a series of lengthy experiments to find out the real cause and nature of these amazing gas pulses. In his paper, Tesla describes the waves passing through the screen as sound waves of electrified air. However, he made a startling description of the sound, heat, light, pressure, and shock he felt as the effect passed through the copper plates. Taken together, they revealed the presence of a carrier with a gaseous structure, that is, one that consists of independent carriers capable of free movement. Since air was definitely not such a carrier, what was he talking about? Below in the same article, he clearly states that, besides air, there is another carrier. With the help of successful experimental equipment, Tesla discovered several facts regarding the formation of his effect. Firstly, the cause of it, no doubt, was the interruption of the current. It was when the switch was closed, at the moment of its making and breaking, that the effect broke out into the surrounding space. It was uniquely tied to time, the duration of the impulse. Secondly, Tesla discovered that a prerequisite was that the process occur in the form of a single impulse. Repeating the shock was unacceptable. The effect did not appear a second time. On this occasion, Tesla made brief notes describing the role of capacitance in the circuit emitting a spark. He found that the effect was greatly enhanced if a capacitor was placed between the spark gap and the dynamo. The dielectric of the capacitor both provided impressive energy to produce the effect and served as protection for the dynamo windings. The effect could also be greatly enhanced by increasing the voltage, speeding up the opening, and shortening the switch's closing time. Until now, Tesla used switches with rotating contacts to produce his unidirectional impulses. When these mechanical pulse systems could no longer cope with the increase in the effect, Tesla began to look for more automatic and powerful devices. He found this circuit breaker in the form of special electrical arc arresters. The high voltage output of the DC generator was connected to the paired conductors through a new arc mechanism, which was a very powerful permanent magnet mounted across the path of the arc discharge. The discharge arc automatically and continuously arose and went out under the influence of a magnetic field. To achieve the required rare effect, it was necessary that the capacitor and connecting wire lines be selected in such a way that the receipt and discharge of the required electrostatic charge occurred in an intermittent, unidirectional manner. Tesla created such a circuit to look like a pulsating jet when no back pressure interferes with the powerful flow. The electrostatic charge increased to its maximum and discharged very quickly. The constant use of a high-voltage dynamo exerted pressure on the circuit, which successfully generated a continuous process of charge, rapid discharge. The Tesla effect could arise under this, and only under this condition. The impulses literally flowed through the apparatus from the dynamo. The capacitor, spark gap, and its connecting wires behaved like a vibrating valve. The high-voltage dynamo remained the true electrostatic source in the apparatus. Tesla appreciated this fact well, feeling the painful effects radiating into space. It was obvious that the dynamo was somehow changed by the addition of these pulsating valve circuits. The dynamos he used provided lethal voltage that could kill a person. The valve circuits amplified the strange radiation of the deadly energy of this field. Somehow the dynamo's energy erupted into space with dangerous and painful force. But how? In what mysterious way was such a state achieved? The result of a series of experiments gave rise to a new concept for Tesla. He had, of course, discovered what was involved in his mysterious shock field effect. It was radiant electricity. Tesla first carried out elaborate, lengthy studies to understand the true nature of this new electrical effect. He realized that the strange shock field was actually being emitted into space from a pulse apparatus. If it was electrostatic energy, it was more powerful and more penetrating than any electrostatic field he had ever observed. If it was just an intermittent electrostatic field, then why was its strength so great? Tesla began to become convinced that he had discovered a new electrical force and not a third-party effect of already known forces. It was for this reason that he often described his effect as electrodynamic, or more electrostatic. By carefully selecting the associated parameters of the circuit, Tesla learned to produce extremely fast series of unidirectional pulses when necessary. When the pulses were short, intermittent, and precisely sequenced, Tesla discovered that the shock effect could spread over a very large area with virtually no loss of intensity. He also found that the damaging effect easily penetrated bulk metal shields and most insulators. By developing ways to control the number of pulses per second and the time intervals between successive pulses, he began to discover more and more new effects. The duration of each pulse had its own special effects. Feeling the stabbing blows, even while behind the screen at a distance of 15 feet from the apparatus, Tesla immediately thought about the opening prospects for transmitting electrical energy without wires. Tesla realized for the first time that electroshock waves offered much greater potential for changing the world than even the use of his polyphase alternating current system. Tesla intended his discoveries entirely for the whole world. Radiant electricity had special characteristics unknown to world science. Working with a simple but powerful incarnation of his apparatus, Tesla discovered that radiant electricity could produce powerful electrical effects at a distance. These effects were not alternating, nor were they ordinary transverse waves. These were longitudinal waves consisting of successive shock waves. The passage of each shock wave, followed by a short neutral zone, generated a radiant field. The vector components of these shock waves were always unidirectional. Intermittent shock waves were capable of influencing charges in the direction of their propagation. Objects placed near the device acquired a strong electrical charge, which retained its sign for several minutes after the magnetic discharger was turned off. Tesla found a way to enhance these effects of charging of the same sign using just an asymmetrical arrangement of a magnetic spark gap. By placing the magnetic spark gap closer to one side or the other of the charging dynamo, it was possible to select and design a force with a positive or negative charge vector, positive and negative electricity. Thus it became possible to transfer or receive charge from any object in the space covered by the field. This was a new electrical force. Tesla realized more than ever that he was in uncharted territory. The fact that these radiant forces propagated like rays of light distinguished them from Maxwell's electromagnetic waves. Tesla wanted to determine the effect of gradually decreasing the duration of the pulses. This work required great experience and precautions. Tesla knew he was putting himself in mortal danger. By controlling the speed of the spark extinguishing process in a direct current magnetic arc, Tesla released a new spectrum of light-like energy into the space of his huge laboratory. The world has never seen this type of energy before. Tesla discovered that the duration of the pulse itself determined the effect of each small segment of the spectrum. These effects were completely different from each other and were endowed with strange additional qualities not previously seen in nature. A series of impulses, each lasting more than 1/10 of a millisecond, generated pain and mechanical pressure. In this radiant field, objects vibrated noticeably and even moved when the force field reached them. Thin wires exposed to brief bursts of radiant field evaporated. Pain and physical movements occurred with impulses lasting equal to or less than 100 microseconds. With pulses lasting 1 microsecond, strong physiological heating was felt. A further decrease in the pulse duration led to a spontaneous glow, filling the rooms and vacuum flasks with white light. At such pulse frequencies, Tesla achieved the appearance of effects that were usually characteristic of the energy of electromagnetic waves of visible light. Shorter pulses generated currents that filled the room with cool currents and were accompanied by a feeling of anxiety and restlessness. There was no limit to the reduction in pulse duration. None of these energy pulses could be repeated using high-frequency harmonic oscillations. Some researchers were able to reproduce these effects because they understood the absolute necessity of studying the parameters set by Tesla. These facts were explained by Eric Dollard, who also successfully obtained the strange and varied effects that Tesla discovered. By 1890, after a period of intense experimentation and equipment design, Tesla described the set of components necessary for the practical application of a radiant electrical energy distribution system. He had already discovered the amazing fact that pulses lasting less than 100 microseconds may not be felt and cause no physiological harm. He planned to use this fact in his electricity distribution system. Moreover, shock waves lasting 100 microseconds penetrated any substance, making them an ideal form for energy transfer in cities that required large amounts of energy. That same year, Tesla made an even more surprising discovery when he placed a long, single-layer cylindrical copper coil near a magnetic spark gap. The coil, which was about 60 centimeters long, behaved differently than straight copper tubes or other objects. A coil of thin copper wire was covered with a crown of white sparks. The corona eddies were very long and flowed in silver-white streams, soft discharges that seemed to be significantly higher in voltage. These effects were greatly enhanced when a single-layer cylindrical coil was placed in a turn of wire coming from the spark gap. Within this shock zone, the cylindrical coil was surrounded by an explosive flash that hugged its surface and erupted from the open end of the coil. It seemed as if the shock wave was repelled from the surrounding space to connect with the coil in a strange, attractive preference. The shock wave flowed into the coil at right angles to the winding, which was incredible. The sheer length of the discharges jumping from the crown of the cylindrical coil was incredible. If a spark of 2.5 centimeters jumped in the magnetic spark gap, then white flickering discharges flowed from the coil more than 60 centimeters. These discharges were comparable to the size of the coil itself. It was an unexpected and unknown transformation. There was an action here that was almost electrostatic in nature, although he knew that academic circles would not allow that term to be used in connection with this situation. Electrostatic energy does not oscillate like shock waves do. Explosive shock waves have characteristics unlike those of any existing electrical machines. Yet Tesla suggested that the shock wave, for a short moment of its explosive manifestation, was more similar to an electrostatic field than any other known electrical phenomenon. In electrostatic friction machines, where currents and magnetism are minuscule, a very energetic field fills the space between the radiant lines. This dielectric field typically passes through space, slowly growing as charges accumulate. There was also a case here where the DC generator produced high voltage. This voltage charges the insulated copper coil, rising to its maximum value. If all the quantities in the circuit were in a certain combination established by Tesla, then the charge suddenly collapsed. The time of this collapse had to be shorter than the required interval for charging the coil. The collapse occurred when the magnetic spark gap interrupted the arc. If the circuit was configured correctly, then oscillations in the opposite direction never occurred. The unidirectional sequence of charge-discharge pulses caused a very strange field to spread outward, which slightly resembled a stuttering or intermittent electrostatic field. But these terms cannot successfully describe the state of the powerful radiant effect actually measured around the apparatus, exceeding all expected electrostatic quantities. Calculating the ratios of these discharges confirmed their impossibility. By performing standard transformation ratio calculations, Tesla could not calculate the enormous effect of voltage amplification. The usual relationships did not help, and Tesla hypothesized that the effect was entirely subject to the radiant transformation rule, which obviously required experimental determination. Subsequent measurements of the discharge length and the parameters of the screw coil provided him with the necessary mathematical relationships. He discovered a new law of induction in which radiant shock waves actually amplified themselves when colliding with segmented objects. Segmentation was key to creating this impact. Radiant shock waves entered the helical coil and were thrown out through its surface from one end to the other. This shock wave did not pass through the coil, winding at all, behaving on its surface like air on an airplane wing. The gradual increase in electrical pressure was measured along the entire surface of the coil. Tesla clearly established that the voltage could be increased to an impressive 10,000 volts per inch of coil height. This meant that a 24-inch coil could collect radiant shock waves with an initially measured input voltage of 10,000 volts and raise it to a maximum value of 240,000 volts. Such a voltage ratio was previously impossible for devices of similar size and simplicity. Tesla subsequently discovered that the output voltage was related to the resistance of the coil turns. Higher coil resistance resulted in higher voltage across the coil. He called his breaker primary, and the cylindrical single-layer coil placed inside the shock zone secondary. But he never compared these terms with those used in conventional electromagnetic transformers. His discovery was completely different from magnetic induction, and there was a reason for this. To introduce a real outlandish formulation, there was one phenomenon that frustrated Tesla at times. He measured zero current in these long copper secondary coils. He determined that the current that should have appeared was completely absent. The net voltage increased with every centimeter of the coil's surface. Tesla constantly referred to his laws of electrostatic induction, which few understood. He called the combination of his chopper and secondary cylindrical single-layer coil transformer. Tesla's transformers were not electromagnetic devices. They used radiant shock waves and produced pure voltage without current. Each transformer conducted only a specific pulse duration with a specific strength. It followed that each of them had to be tuned by adjusting the spark gap to a certain pulse duration. Changing the length of the arc provided such adjustment. When each transformer was tuned to its own characteristic response, like resonance, pulses could flow smoothly through the system, like gas in a pipe. Having discovered gas dynamic analogies that were consistent with the available data and were a good estimate in this regard, Tesla began to study whether the white flame of discharges, so different from what he had previously seen, was a gaseous manifestation of electrostatic force. There were a considerable number of experiments in which their truly gaseous nature was clearly revealed, so unlike anything electrical. The way in which radiant shock waves flowed through the conductive windings in white, shimmering laminar jets brought a new revolution to Tesla's thinking. Voltage pulses crossed the surface of the secondary coil like gas pulses under increasing pressure. Until the gaseous pulses reached the free end of the coil, they flowed along its copper surface without penetrating inside. Tesla called this specific phenomenon the skin effect. In this respect, the discharge behaved very similarly to a gas moving over the surface of a pipe. Moreover, when a metal tip was attached to the top terminal of one of his transformers, the flow became more directed. He behaved like a stream of water in a pipe. When the white twisting stream was directed at distant metal plates, it injected electrical charges into them. This appearance of charge could be measured as a current at the receiving end. In the transmitting space, however, no current was generated. The current appeared only in the receiver. Eric Dollard found that such a flux was released into the space surrounding Tesla pulse transformers that the received current could reach hundreds and even thousands of amperes. But what did this mysterious stream consist of? Tesla struggled with the uncertainty that his discharge phenomenon could be ordinary electricity behaving in an unusual way. But could electricity have such a smooth, soft, writhing nature? The electricity he was used to was shocking, hot, burning, deadly, piercing, stabbing. All its attributes were irritating. But this discharge phenomenon, whether it was cold or warm when touched, remained soft and gentle. It couldn't kill. Even the way the pulse exploded, creating a bright white discharge of incredibly amplified voltage, was similar to the behavior of gas escaping from a pipe under pressure. These thoughts led Tesla to the conclusion that this effect was not purely electrical in nature. By studying the white flame in more detail, Tesla discovered why the corona of the operating coil had no measurable electric current. The usual heavy charge carriers, electrons, could not travel as fast as the radiant pulse itself. Stuck in the crystal lattice of the coil, the electrons became motionless. None of the electrons moved around the coil at all. The emitted pulse that moved along the surface of the coil was not, therefore, electronic in nature. In addition to everything, Tesla discovered an amazing phenomenon that resolved all doubts regarding the nature of the energy carriers in his apparatus. Tesla installed a very heavy U-shaped copper bus bar, connecting both legs directly to the arrestor. Several incandescent light bulbs were located between the legs of the U-shaped bus. Their arrangement formed a short-circuited circuit. The lamps glowed with a brilliant, cold, white light, while they themselves were short-circuited by a thick copper shunt. This was uncharacteristic of ordinary electricity, brightly glowing, but at the same time cold lamps showed that another energy current runs through the short-circuited circuit. Those who observed this experiment expected that during its execution the breaker circuit, or even the dynamo itself, would burn out. Instead, they saw a miracle. The lamps glowed with extraordinary brightness. This simple demonstration was just one piece of evidence that Tesla's theories were right. Electronic charges prefer a circuit with less resistance and must travel around incandescent lamps along a copper shunt. The radiant current in this situation preferred the opposite principle. This was probably the case because the currents were not electric. Tesla constantly used this demonstration to show the separation of electronic currents from neutral currents. There remained one simple question, the answer to which would provide the necessary information to create a new technology. What exactly separated or fractionated the different transporters in his transformer? It was a geometric coil configuration that inadvertently separated each component. The electrons were trapped in the wire, while the radiant pulse was released above the surface of the coil as a gaseous pulse. The electrons would have to pass through the wire, but during each pulse period, they would be blocked by the line resistance. Thus, the gaseous mobile carriers were released and flowed over the wire, the impulse traveling along the outer surface of the coil from one end to the other. This was evidence that the electrical discharges definitely consisted of several moving particles simultaneously. Now Tesla understood why his high-frequency alternating charges from his first experiments never showed such powerful manifestations. It was the intermittency, the violent pulse discharge, that gave this unexpected gaseous component the ability to move freely. Impulses, unidirectional impulses, were the only way by which this potential could be released. Sinusoidal oscillations were absolutely useless in this regard. Moreover, since the oscillations could not release the second gas dynamic component, they remained useless and had pitiful power. Tesla forever began to regard his high-frequency oscillation devices as a failed project. This was the reason for his extremely critical reviews of the work of Marconi and other researchers who developed high-frequency radio. Tesla began working in a field that now has more enemies and critics than any other field in this century. Now Tesla began to explore the ether with great interest. Tesla believed that dielectric fields were actually made of ether currents. Theoretically, it is then possible to obtain an unlimited amount of energy by capturing and driving a natural dielectric field line into a conductor. The problem was that none of the normal materials available could resist the ether enough to get the slightest force impulse out of it. With a flow so rarefied that it penetrates any known material, the kinetic energy contained in the dielectric field lines remained an inaccessible energy source. Tesla believed he could find the secret to capturing this energy, but it would require an unusual kind of material. Tesla viewed tension as flows of ether under various states of pressure. By increasing this pressure, it was possible to produce enormous energy from the ether, where the observed voltage would become extremely high and luminescent. This was exactly the state that Tesla believed he was getting in his transformers. In fact, Tesla never tired of repeating that his transformers produced powerful movements in the ether. In one truly amazing experiment showing this phenomenon, he described receiving a sequence of very rapid pulses, followed by the appearance of cool, misty white streams penetrating a yard into the surrounding space. They were cool to the touch and safe. If they were electrical in nature, their potential would have reached several million volts. Their harmlessness is due to their wave-like nature, which is completely unusual for electrical currents. Of course, to understand Tesla's technology, it is necessary to discard the idea that electrons were the working fluid in his energy-emitting devices. When the lower end of the coil was connected directly to the dynamo, a stream of high-voltage ether was emitted from the upper terminal. When Tesla described his new technology in his patents, he spoke of light-like rays and natural environments. The former term referred to the tightly compressed jets of ether that were emitted from his transformers along infinitesimal beams, and the latter referred to the atmospheric ether with which all his technology was imbued. It is impossible to understand Tesla technology without opposing points of view on the ether. Many analysts reject his concept without preliminary searches and studies, which were obtained in many experiments, for example, by Eric Dollard. Tesla put forward the idea that streams of ether were pushed through his transformers under the influence of natural increased pressure and accelerated in the form of a sharp electrical discharge. Tesla's apparatus cannot be fully understood or explained as an electrical system. Tesla technology must be viewed as a technology of ethereal gas, which can only be explained through gas dynamic analogies. It is now easy to understand how such emitted rays, streams of ethereal gas under high pressure, can penetrate both metals and insulators. These powerful rays can often penetrate various materials with inexplicable ease. Electricity is not capable of generating such a miracle. Tesla also now understood why these discharge streams produced quiet hissing sounds, like gas escaping under high pressure. Ether gas under pressure. Tesla was intrigued. He successfully released the mysterious radiant current normally bound and compressed in electrical charge carriers. It is released by unidirectional pulsed discharges of high voltage and short duration. What other possibilities can ethereal gas technology bring? The original cylindrical coils were quickly replaced by tapered coils. Using this strange geometry, Tesla was able to focus the gas dynamic component, which now rose from the tip of the coil as a burst of hissing white light. Tesla recognized that these shockingly white and awe-inspiring discharges were actually energy losses. Powerful energy distribution stations would now distribute this energy radiation in all directions. Flame-like discharges gave energy the ability to form waves in space. This could lead to unwanted energy losses over long distances. Consumers would not receive the required and constant flow of energy. If he was going to use his energy transformers to transmit with great efficiency, he would need to suppress these flame-like discharges. But suppressing these excessive bursts of ether has proven problematic. Tesla found out that the white flickering streams were absorbed by large volumes and masses, in which the streams became stuck, filtered, and destroyed. Using copper spheres on top of the transformers caused the streams to significantly absorb the white flames. Now the energy was distributed in space as intended, but a new problem has appeared. Copper spheres, struck by high-voltage currents, became conductive and destroyed electronic components. This phenomenon was inseparable from radiation and gave rise to very dangerous phenomena. The problem arose due to conductivity, in the case where a spherical copper ball was compressed throughout the entire volume. White flickering streams penetrated the copper and tore electrons out of it. These pollutants concentrated and came out as dangerous blue stabbing arrows. In comparison, the white flame-like discharge was a gentle and harmless stream. Comparing both cases, Tesla saw the difference in charge carriers. One day he almost died when one of these arrows jumped a meter into the air and hit him right in the heart. The copper spheres had to be replaced with other scattering components. Metals were not suitable here since they were natural electron storage facilities. Tesla came to the conclusion that metals produce electrons when exposed to these special fiery white streams, when the carriers of the white flame begin to concentrate in the crystal lattice of the metal. Now he was studying how the very air around the transformers produced a strange self-glow. High-frequency coils have never produced such light, a bright white crown that even increased in diameter. The glow from the Tesla transformers gradually increased. Tesla described a growing column of light that surrounded each ascending conductive line in the air, connecting to his transformer. Unlike normal high-frequency oscillations, the effects of Tesla's radiant energy increased over time. Tesla found the reason for their growth process. Although there was no change in the source of the discharge, the radiant energy never reduced the work done on any space or material exposed. Like unidirectional pulse discharges, radiant electrical effects added up and accumulated. In this regard, Tesla saw a multiplication of energy that seemed completely anomalous to ordinary engineering calculations. It was easy to control the lighting in the room by adjusting the output voltage of the transformer. The light from this type of illumination was quite bright to human perception, but it was almost impossible to photograph. To do this, Tesla used long exposures, and only then did the faintest image of the streams appear. This strange impossibility of photographic capture was the exact opposite of the radiance felt by the eye, which required delicate control. Tesla also designed, made, and used large spherical lamps that required a single external input to produce radiant energy. Despite the varying distances to the source of radiant energy, the lamps always glowed brightly. In terms of brightness, they approached arc lamps and were superior to any standard Edison incandescent light bulb of the same size. Tesla could also easily control the heating of any space. By changing the voltage and pulse duration of his transformers, he could heat the room. Cool currents could also be caused by certain pulse duration settings. The key to producing any action on the ether was the secret of the approach to changing the inhomogeneities of the ether, a process that only Tesla dealt with. Sir Oliver Lodge opined that the only way to get the ether was electrically, but no member of the Royal Society could reproduce this process, with the sole exception of Sir William Crookes. Tesla's method used ether to change the ether. The secret was the separation of ether pollutants from the ether currents at the source itself, a feature which he obtained in his transformers and magnetic arc breakers. Tesla used the power of arc discharges interrupted by a magnet to randomize electronic and etheric charge carriers in metal conductors. By breaking the links connecting them, each component was freed for sorting. This state could not be obtained in arc gaps, where the charges could oscillate in opposite directions. In such devices, electronic carriers suppressed the release of ether, and while ether was present in the discharge, it could not be separated from the mixed current. The incredible efficiency of the magnetic arc gap for producing etheric currents followed from several principles. Tesla saw that electric current was actually a complex combination of ether and electrons. When electricity passed through the spark gap, the main separation process began. The electrons were forcefully pushed out of the discharge gap by a strong magnetic field. However, streams of ether, neutral in charge, continued to flow through the circuit. The magnetic discharger was central to separating electrons from ether particles. Ether particles were extremely mobile, almost weightless in comparison with electrons, and could therefore penetrate matter with very little effort. Electrons could not match the ether in speed and penetrating power. According to this point of view, the particles of the ether were infinitesimal, much smaller in size than electrons. The ether particles carried momentum with them. Their enormous speed was consistent with their massless nature. The combination of these properties was observed when they were large in number. They moved faster than the speed of light, a result of their incompressibility and lack of mass. Whenever a directed radiant pulse of energy arises, an incompressible movement in space immediately arises to all points located on its path. This kind of motion manifested itself in a solid beam, which challenged modern ideas about signal delays in space. Incompressible rays could instantly move to any distance. Even though there was a distance of 300,000 kilometers ahead, the impulse reached this point as quickly as any other. This is superluminal speed, instantaneous transmission. Radiant matter behaves incompressibly. The effect of this is that this stream of radiant matter, almost massless and hydrodynamically incompressible, is pure energy, radiant energy, free energy. This was definitely a phenomenon that was in no way consistent with other manifestations of the impulse. Tesla, in contrast, called these pure ethereal emissions radiant matter and radiant energy. Neutral in charge and infinitesimal in mass and size, radiant energy was like nothing else. If you ask whether radiant energy can be compared to any other physical phenomenon known today, the answer is no. We cannot draw parallels between radiant energy and light energy, as science previously believed. Even though it is very similar to light, radiant energy has properties that the light we can receive does not have. Therein lies the problem. Tesla technology is pulse technology. Without an intermittent unidirectional pulse, it's impossible to obtain the effects of radiant energy. The production of radiant energy requires special energy equipment that produces short, rapid pulses. These impulses must be obtained by means of an explosive opening circuit breaker, as Tesla prescribed.
Chapter 3, Testing Tesla's Secrets.
Before returning to the conversation about Ed Gray's cold energy patterns, I would like to spend a little time on the current evidence in support of Vassilatos' theory. Unfortunately, I was unable to obtain a copy of Tesla's lecture, Dividing Electricity, so I cannot refer to this document to verify Vassilatos' analysis. However, I feel that his view of Tesla's work is so different from all others that I cannot ask you, the reader, to simply accept it on faith. And I began to study the enormous amount of material currently available about Tesla's work in an attempt to find documents confirming Vassilatos' theory. I hope to obtain more than enough evidence from the works of Tesla himself, published in a huge book entitled Nikola Tesla, Lectures, Patents, and Articles. Thus, the following quotation is taken from Tesla's article, Problems of Increasing Human Energy, first published in June 1900 in the Century Illustrated Monthly magazine. Since I described these simple principles of telegraphy without wires, I have been told many times that similar properties can obviously be explained by the transmission of a signal over considerable distances by means of Hertzian waves. This is only one of the misconceptions to which the research of this deceased has led physics about 33 years ago. Maxwell, following up on Faraday's experiment in 1845, created a perfectly simple theory that deeply connected light and heat radiation and electricity, explaining them all by the vibration of an incomprehensibly rarefied hypothetical liquid called the ether. There was no experimental confirmation of this fact until Hertz, at the suggestion of Helmholtz, conducted a series of experiments to study this effect. Hertz worked with extraordinary genius and inspiration, but did not pay due attention to improving his outdated apparatus. As a result, he failed to observe what I later discovered, the important role air played in his experiments. Having repeated his experiments and made several conclusions different from Hertz. I took the risk of pointing out this mistake to him. The strength of the evidence obtained by Hertz in support of Maxwell's theory rested on the correct estimation of the frequency of vibration in the circuits he used. But I discovered that he wasn't actually observing the frequencies he thought he was. The vibrations of a machine like the one he used were generally much slower. This was due to the presence of air, which produced a strong damping effect on a rapidly vibrating electrical circuit under high pressure, much like a liquid acts on a tuned vibrator. I, however, just at this time, discovered other causes of errors, and for a long time looked at his results as experimental proof of Maxwell's poetic concepts. The work of the great German physicist was a huge stimulus for modern electrical research, but it also greatly paralyzed the minds of scientists, and therefore prevented independent research. Each new discovered phenomenon was driven into the framework of theory, and therefore, very often, the truth was unconsciously distorted. Obviously, Tesla did not agree with the work of Helmholtz, Hertz, and Maxwell. For those readers who are not familiar with the merits of these gentlemen, let me remind you that Hermann von Helmholtz worked on the origins of what is now called the first law of thermodynamics, which states that energy can change from one form to another, but cannot be either created nor destroyed. The James Clerk Maxwell equations are the foundation of modern electromagnetic theory, and Heinrich Hertz's supposed confirmation of Maxwell's work was considered so important that a unit of frequency was named after him. These esteemed gentlemen are the central figures in the edifice of modern electrical science to this day. But as we see, Tesla rejected their works as not corresponding to the results he himself obtained. In other words, if we want to follow him and study the ether, we must forget about the ideas and limitations established by the first law of thermodynamics and Maxwell's equations. We will work beyond the boundaries of these rules and move into a completely different realm of science. In the concluding provisions of the article, Transmission of Electrical Energy Without Wires, published in the Electrical World and Engineer in March 1904, Tesla states, "When the great truth is suddenly discovered and experimentally confirmed that this planet, with all its awesome, the immensity of electric charges, scarcely more, in fact, than a small metal ball, and when from this follow vast possibilities, each of which is amazing and has innumerable applications, and they will be fully exploited. When the first plan is adopted, and it shows that a telegraphic message, almost as secret and uninterceptible as a thought, can be transmitted to any distance, the sound of a human voice, with all its intonation and expression, will be accurately and instantly reproduced anywhere on the globe. The energy of falling water will be available to produce light, heat, and movement. At sea, on land, or high in the sky, then humanity will become like a torn-up anthill. Just look how excited he is." It sounds like Tesla truly discovered something amazing, understood the phenomenon, and expected it to provide endless possibilities. It sounds as if this something was completely on the other side of everything that was known before. Even now, 100 years later, we are just lifting the veil on some of these possibilities, especially when it comes to the task of transmitting the human voice. But we still do not have the opportunity to have access to energy, either on land, or at sea, or in the air. Clearly, Tesla was referring to something that never made it into our lives. What did Tesla do? What evidence do we have that Tesla actually worked on the systems that Mr. Vassilatos talks about in his book? First, there is evidence that Tesla was working on spark gap circuits in an attempt to achieve higher and higher spark discharge rates. On Fig 10 Tesla mechanical controller for an electrical circuit, you can see an excerpt from one of Tesla's many patents with the title Electrical Circuit Controller. This patent is extremely interesting because it describes two electric motors rotating in opposite directions, with spark gaps between these moving parts. It is obvious that Tesla was trying to achieve higher speeds than he could achieve using only one rotating spark gap. This is a pure example of Tesla working on a mechanical spark controller in an attempt to increase the discharge rate, just as Vassilatos pointed out in his book, on Fig 11 Magnetic Electrical Discharge Interrupter. The only illustration from the book Lectures, Patents, Articles is presented, which depicts a spark gap with magnetic arc quenching. However, it uses an electromagnet rather than a permanent magnet, as described by Vassilatos. From this it is clear that Tesla was working on spark gaps with magnetic arc quenching. This is just one of many experiments to interrupt or extinguish the arc. This is quite an interesting mechanism because it is obviously designed to extinguish DC arcs. A DC arc is quite difficult to strike. The presence of spring-loaded handles on each side allows the arc rods to be spaced closer together to create the initial spark that occurs when the end of one rod touches the other. The handles are then pressed back to their original position, allowing a direct current arc to be created in such difficult conditions. Fig 12 hot air arc interrupter shows a different spark gap mechanism. In it, Tesla used blowing hot air across the spark gap and, as indicated in the accompanying text, it also used a magnetic field. Since Tesla used both hot air and a magnetic field in his spark gap, it is clear that he was looking for a variety of possibilities for controlling spark discharges. Of course, over high-voltage direct current spark discharges. The cover of the patent entitled Electrical Transformer is shown at Fig 13 Tesla Electrical Transformer. Tesla indicates that he plans to use this invention in the design of improved coils that will be used to transmit energy over very long distances. One of the illustrations in this patent, Rice 14 a single-wire power transmission, Rice 14B single-wire power transmission, clearly shows that he designed what Vassilatos said. The design contains only a few turns in the primary winding and uses a conical coil as the secondary winding, that is, all those elements that Vassilatos described. On Rice 15 illustration of Tesla's amplifying transmitter. An illustration is shown from Tesla's patent entitled The Art of Transmitting Electrical Energy Through Natural Media. Diagram on Fig 16 Tesla amplifying transmitter, as described in the patent, is an enlarged portion of this illustration, showing the basic structure of source B, feeding the two-turn primary and the helical coil in its middle. This apparatus was designed to transmit energy over long distances, so it also includes connections to the earth and sky. Element E** was connected to the ground, and element E Tesla called a raised container, and it was supposed to be located on the balloon. This was the heart of the amplifying transmission system that Tesla attempted to build at Wardenclyffe, New York, in order to transmit energy anywhere on the planet. Particularly interesting in this design is the energy source B. If you look at the diagram, the B on the left looks like a simple generator symbol. However, the following excerpt from the patent expands our view of what B is. In illustration 1, A denotes the primary coil of the transformer and consists essentially of several turns of thick cable with an imperceptible resistance, the ends of which connected to the terminals of a powerful source of electrical oscillations, indicated in the diagram as B. It has a high potential and discharges in the form of rapid pulses to the primary coil, as in a transformer invented by me. I called the right part of Figure 16 Tesla's multiplying transmitter, since it is described in the text of the patent. It shows a capacitor and an arc interrupter, in this case a magnetic interrupter, such that he can control the characteristics of the discharge pulses as desired. Let us give another quote from the patent, where Tesla says, I have discovered that in this way, it is possible in practice to obtain electrical motion thousands of times greater than the initial one. And again, he talks about an incredible increase in electrical movement. This is not a normal increase in voltage, as in conventional transformers, but an increase in power. A little higher on the same page, Tesla points out, if all settings and relationships are accurately carried out, as well as with strict adherence to other specified design features, the electrical movement produced in the secondary system from the induced action of the primary, A, will be enormously increased. Tesla apparently believed, and repeated many times, that this system was capable of producing more energy than was supplied to it. This concept is now called free energy. For further evidence of the correctness of Vassilatos's analysis, I turn again to the book Lectures, Patents, Articles. On page L112, figure in 17 illustrations from Tesla's lecture, February 1893. You can see the article about the apparatus and conversion method. Shown here is a generator that produces alternating current in the circuits on the left and direct current in the circuits on the right. On Fig.18, close-up of the conversion method, an enlarged image of DC circuits is shown. The middle picture shows what Tesla calls direct current from the main generator and passes it through another apparatus, which, as we are told in the text, increases the direct current voltage even more. The circuit then charges the capacitor and discharges it through a spark gap with a magnetic breaker to power lamps and other apparatus. This, published in Tesla's works, is direct evidence that he worked with all the components described by Vassilatos. To tell the truth, he has hidden them in the shadow of other possibilities, but all the necessary elements are present and clearly described. In addition to this, here is the following astonishing statement by Tesla, taken from the article Problems of Increasing Human Energy, published in the June 1900 issue of Century magazine, p. 145. Whatever electricity is, in fact, it behaves like an incompressible fluid, and the Earth can be looked at as a huge reservoir of electricity. Considering that Nikola Tesla was the inventor of the polyphase electrical power distribution system now used throughout the world, it is surprising that he says he doesn't know what electricity is, but that it definitely behaves like a fluid under pressure. This understanding of the essence of electricity, of course, is completely at odds with the generally accepted point of view. Tesla's assertion that electricity behaves like an incompressible fluid only leads to a new question. What kind of fluid is he talking about? Could this be one of Tesla's encrypted references to ether gas, as Vassilatos believes? From the text in the same article, on page A148, there are the following statements relating to this subject. At last, however, I was pleased to solve the problem of applying a new principle, the merit of which rests on the marvelous properties of the electric condenser. One of them is that it can discharge or release in the form of an explosion the energy contained in it in an unimaginably short time. Another of its properties, also of equal value, is that its discharge can oscillate at any desired frequency, up to many millions of times per second. I have so arranged a similar instrument that it may be alternately rapidly charged and discharged through a coil of several turns of thick wire formed into the primary winding of the transformer. Electrical effects of any required character and intensity, which were previously unthinkable, can now be easily obtained in an improved apparatus of the kind to which I have often referred, and the most important parts of which are shown in Figure 6. For some purposes, a strong inducing effect is required. For others, the highest possible surprise. For still others, incredibly high-frequency vibrations or extreme pressure. For the fourth, enormous electrical movement is necessary. Rice, 6 Gray's chain patent. So, I believe that we now have more than sufficient references from Tesla's own work to support Vasilatos' main idea. Ideas that Tesla actively worked with capacitors charged from high-voltage DC sources. He discharged them through spark gaps with a magnetic interrupter. He carried out this procedure at extremely high rates of vibration, up to many millions of times per second. And finally, this method was used to control his amplifying transmitter, a device that produced and captured what Tesla called radiant energy. The question is, do we have any direct evidence beyond this written evidence that Tesla's amplifying transmitter actually produces another form of electricity? To answer this question, I will refer to Rice. 19 discharge of radiant energy, which shows a black and white version of the color photograph of Eric Dollard's booster transmitter discharge that appears on the cover of this book. This photograph was taken by Alison Davidson in 1986 and was provided to me by Tom Brown in New Zealand. The top of the coil was approximately 8 inches in diameter. It is unknown what the voltage of this discharge was, but it was probably as high as 400,000 V. The other end of the coil supplied a current of 4A to the ground wire, as measured by a radio frequency ammeter. The entire system consumed less than 2,000 watts of power from a regular outlet. In this photograph, you can see a non-perfectly pure etheric discharge emitting blue needles, as Tesla described. Here I would like to add the testimony of another eyewitness regarding the nature of radiant energy and Tesla's cold electricity. On the same day that Alison Davidson took this photograph, Tom Brown and I conducted an amazing experiment. I took an ordinary incandescent light bulb and held it by the base with my right hand. I then asked Tom to go over and touch the center terminal of the light bulb with his finger. As soon as he did this, the filament of the light bulb in our hands flashed with a bright light. I stood about 6 feet from the transmitter, and Tom stood 8 feet away. I did not feel any unpleasant sensations, but I was very shocked and surprised. Until that moment, I had no idea how safe this form of energy was. Summarizing all of the above, it is obvious that Tesla, trying to confirm Hertz's discovery of electromagnetic waves, discovered the electrostatic effect of supercharge. After conducting hundreds of experiments, he learned to control and maximize this phenomenon. This led him to the discovery that electricity was made up of many different components that could be separated from each other, and that this pure gaseous etheric energy could be separated from the flow of electrons in a circuit designed to produce unidirectional pulses of short duration. When all conditions are properly met, this gaseous etheric energy manifests itself as a voltage distributed in space, and which can be emitted from an electrical circuit as a light-like beam that is capable of charging other surfaces placed in this field. From now on, I will call the described phenomenon electroradiant effect, and I want to summarize its characteristics, generalized properties of the electroradiant effect. 1. The electroradiant effect is produced when a high-voltage direct current is discharged into the spark gap and is quickly interrupted until any reversible reverse current occurs. 2. This effect increases significantly when the DC source is a charged capacitor. 3. The electroradiant effect leaves wires and other circuit components perpendicular to the flow of current. 4. The electroradiant effect generates a spatially distributed voltage that can exceed the initial voltage at the spark gap by thousands of times. 5. It propagates in the form of a longitudinal electrostatic light-like beam that behaves like an incompressible gas under pressure. 6. The electroradiant effect can be fully characterized by the pulse duration and the voltage across the spark gap. 7. The electroradiant effect penetrates all materials and creates electronic responses in metals such as copper and silver. In this case, electronic responses means that an electrical charge will increase on copper surfaces exposed to electroradiant emission. 8. Electrical pulses lasting less than 100 microseconds are absolutely safe for your hands and will not cause shock or other harm. 9. Electrical emitting pulses with a duration of less than 100 nanoseconds are cold and easily create light effects in vacuum tubes. The electroradiant effect is essentially the key mechanism that Tesla discovered to be the basis of his amplifying transmitter. This led to his assertion that he could produce much more energy at the output of the device than was supplied to its input.
Chapter 4. Deciphering Gray's Patterns.
I have spent so much time in previous chapters explaining the nuances of the Tesla amplifying transmitter because it is directly related to Edwin Gray's cold electricity circuit. To better understand how it works, Fig. 20 shown on the left is the Gray circuit, as shown in patent number 459 or 5975, and on the right is what I call the simplified Gray circuit. I put the word circuit in quotes because it's not really a drawing of a circuit. To better understand this circuit in its most general form, I have temporarily excluded from it some components that provide functions not directly related to its main purpose, namely the following components. Note 64 and 66 inside the dotted line, showing an alternative path to supply power to the circuit from an AC source. These parts can be omitted without significantly affecting the circuit design, which can also be operated from a battery. Components. Nosen 42, 44, and 46, which act as overload protection, can be excluded because, as stated in the patent text cited in the first chapter, they are included only to protect the circuit in case it produces too much power. Component hash 26, which Gray called the switch, is part of the Time Master. However, only vacuum triode number 28 is important for supplying pulses that control the discharge of the capacitor, and therefore device number 26 can be excluded. Component hash 48 is a switching mechanism that allows the operator to select which battery will be discharged and which will be charged in the circuit. This can be eliminated by assuming that battery 18 will power the circuit, while battery 40 is being charged. By eliminating these components, we arrive at the simplified Gray circuit diagram, shown in the diagram to the right dot in G. Gray's patents. On Fig. 21, Tesla's amplifying transmitter and Gray's cold electricity circuit. Tesla's amplifying transmitter is shown next to Gray's cold electricity circuit. I entitled this illustration Similar Features of Tesla's Amplifying Transmitter and Gray's Cold Electricity Circuit. The comparison reveals many similar elements, the most important of which are the following. They both operate on high-voltage DC power supply. In Tesla's case, this is a high-voltage direct current generator, source B. In Gray's case, this is battery number 18, the output of which is interrupted by multivibrator number 20. The low-voltage pulses from the multivibrator are applied to the primary winding of transformer number 22. The secondary high-voltage winding of the transformer is connected to bridge rectifier number 24. A high DC voltage appears at the output of bridge number 24. In other words, both circuits are supplied with high-voltage direct current. The next common component in both circuits is the capacitor. In Tesla's circuit, it is designated C. In Gray's circuit num. 16. Both circuits operate by repeatedly charging the capacitor from a high-voltage direct current source. Another common component is the spark gap. In Tesla's diagram, it is represented as DD. In Gray's diagram, it is designated number 62. For the proper operation of both circuits, the spark gap must have two properties. Firstly, there must be a means to ensure that the spark goes in only one direction, and, secondly, there must be means to control the duration of the spark. In the case of a Tesla circuit, we have continuous pressure from a high-voltage generator to ensure unidirectional discharge of the capacitor, and a magnetic field across the spark gap to interrupt the current as quickly as it occurs. The duration of the spark is determined by both the strength of the magnetic field and the capacitance of the capacitor. In the case of Gray's circuit, we know that he used very large capacitors, so he definitely could not discharge the capacitor in one cycle. Its circuit contained two special functional elements, a number 30 resistor, which limited the discharge current, and a number 28 vacuum tube, which not only extinguished the discharge of any desired duration, but also provided protection against reverse currents in that part of the circuit. So again, it is clear that in both circuits, all the necessary devices are present. Further, in both circuits, there was what I call the preferred location of the electroradiant effect. In Tesla's case, this is what he called 2 turns of thick wire, A, which are the primary winding of his air transformer. But as we learned from Mr. Vasilatos, it was not a magnetic inductive type transformer. The magnetic coupling between the primary and secondary windings was very weak. In fact, this device is based on the principles that Tesla called his new laws of electrostatic induction. In Gray's case, the preferred location for the electroradiant effect to occur is his conversion element switch tube, number 14. This component is a purely electrostatic device, as we found out earlier. It is specially designed to provide an explosive electrostatic effect, radiating in all directions from the central rod and perpendicular to the latter. The next common element is the preferred method for intercepting the electroradiant effect. For Tesla, this is the secondary winding of his transformer, F. This is the conical or spiral coil that Vasilatos mentioned, and which we saw in Tesla's patents. In Gray's case, these are charge-receiving grids, number 34, which collect the radiated voltage. It is important to note that in both circuits, there are no direct connections between the energy source and the receiving element. Only at these output components does an induced electroradiant charge appear. The next element is preferred energy output path. In Tesla's case, the solution is grounding, E, and raised solitary capacitance, E, which form his worldwide wireless energy transmission system. In Gray's case, the output discharges from the charge-receiving grids are directed to inductive load number 36. This element could be bouncing magnets, or the output of a transformer feeding his cold electricity circuit, or repelling magnets in his motor. And again, each circuit has its own preferred ways of intercepting the electroradiant effect, and preferred ways of connecting it to the load. Finally, Gray could convert some of the excess energy back into regular electricity and return enough of it to recharge the battery, as we saw above. Tesla did not work with this recharging process, since his system was designed to be used as a hydroelectric power source. Although Lindemann should have known about the box on the 1931 Tesla car dead. Thus, from a comparison of Tesla's amplifying transmitter and Gray's cold electricity circuit, it is clear that in their purposes and purpose they were the same circuits. They work the same, have the same set of elements, although they function slightly differently. They both have as their goal the production of a large output of the cold form of electrostatic energy. Tesla's system was obviously much larger since he planned to use it to supply energy to the entire world. Gray just wanted to power your home or your car. But in terms of purpose and purpose, these systems perform the same functions and use the same electroradiant amplification mechanism on FOIG 22 Gray chain from patent number 4500 and 95975. Again, the schematic of Gray's circuit from his patent, an efficient power source suitable for inductive loads, is presented. After studying this diagram for a long time, I realized that there are several unclear areas in it. First, Let's take a look at component hash 42. If you believe what's pictured, remember this is a surge protector. It appears to be completely shorted. If there was actually an electrical connection here, it would short out and prevent capacitor hash 16 from charging. Clearly there are some problems with this part of the drawing. Now let's take a look at components NOS 26 and 28, which are described in the text of the patent as follows. Control over the conversion switching element tube is carried out by switch 26. It is a set of contacts placed radially on the axis of the device, or can be used as a control element. A time-sensitive solid-state switch, or some other variation of the same device, a switching element tube, 28, providing a unidirectional path for energy, is installed between switching device and a conversion switching element tube to prevent the occurrence of a high-voltage arc when the current in the switch is interrupted. If the switch, number 26, was a solid-state device, then no arcing would need to be prevented. That is, the purpose of element numbers 28, described in the text, is misleading. However, component hash 28 is described as a one-way energy path. Gray specifically stated that the energy in a given section of the circuit should only flow in one direction. It is very important to achieve this state, since it is in strict accordance with the parameters that Tesla described as necessary for the occurrence of the electroradiant effect. There is another suspicious gap, which is the connection of component number 28. The control grid in this triode is not connected to anything, but it, of course, was supposed to control the duration of the spark discharge. The text of the patent makes no mention of the operation of component numbers as 28, or how the grid is controlled. Understanding that component hash 28 had no controls was an important discovery for me. The next problem I ran into was the inductive load, component hash 36. Firstly, element hash 36 is described as an inductor, but there was no coil symbol in the picture, like components hash 22 and 66. Secondly, around this two strange arrows were drawn on the component. The text of the patent indicated that it could be two coils that repel each other to produce mechanical work. Taking this into account, the arrows could consist of two cores located opposite each other at a slight angle. This is not clear from the text of the patent. Third, we can't see the current path through this component, so we can't tell where the discharge current is going. And finally, fourthly, the circuit is connected to the second capacitor, numbered 38. In the text of the patent, this component is described as part of the battery recharging mechanism. However, none of these components make sense. For example, if pulses come from inductor, numbered 36, and begin to charge capacitor, numbers 38, then there is not a single connection in the circuit that would allow it to discharge. Based on these gaps, I've come to the view that this section of the diagram is more of a block diagram than a true circuit diagram. I have come to the conclusion that all that is really clear here is that the charge-receiving grids are in connection with an inductive load, which in turn is connected to a receiving capacitor, which somehow charges the battery. It follows that this section of the block diagram only shows that these components are in connection with each other, but does not indicate how they are actually connected. In our move towards a more complete understanding of what Gray's circuit design must have actually looked like, we must now direct our attention to his conversion element switching tube, Fig 23 Gray conversion tube diagram. It is, after all, the heart of the device, a component that Gray always described as a top-secret means of generating and mixing static electricity. This is the very element in which free energy is produced and collected. The conversion element switch tube is actually three components in one housing. It consists of resistor, number 30, a spark gap, the space between NOS 32 and 12, and a space surrounded by charge-receiving grids, num 34A and 34B. Although not stated in the patent text, we know that the spark gap has a voltage of about 3000 V, based on Gray's words in the articles in the first chapter of the book. The long part of what Gray calls the high voltage anode, numbers 12, is the surface from which the electroradiant effect is emitted. This burst of free energy is emitted from component hash 12 perpendicular to the direction of the current moving down the spark discharge. The figure shows that this component is relatively thick. This is not a delay at all. But what are its characteristics? This is not described in the patent. We can assume that it is made of pure metal without any insulation coating. It may have a mirror finish and be made of stainless steel or other non-magnetic material. There are a lot of different options to explore here, but the diameter of the element, and whether it is solid or hollow, is probably an important factor. These questions are still waiting for their researcher, and today remain unclear. Concentric receiving grids, nosed to 34A and 34B, around element number 12, are designed to intercept the electroradiant effect. As stated above, the patent states, this element consists of a low-voltage anode, a high-voltage anode, and one or more electrostatic or charge-receiving grids. This figure definitely shows 2 charge-receiving grids. The portion of Gray's patent covering this component states, the shape and location of the electrostatic grids also depends on the requirements for the device, that is, voltage, current, and power. The inventor claims that with a reasonable interface of the elements of the conversion element switching tube and with the correct selection of components included in the system, the required theoretical results can be obtained. According to the inventor, the processes of this pairing and selection are possible with intensive use of the researched technologies. I'm sure he had reason to say that. That's all I'm going to tell you, but you can figure it out for yourself if you know what you're doing. Then he says, the preferred embodiment of this invention involves nothing more than the optimal use and obtaining of optimum output from these portable power units, similar in principle to rechargeable batteries or dry batteries. This invention involves the use of the energy contained in the generated high-voltage discharge to provide energy to an inductive load, which then can be converted into energy to produce useful electrical or mechanical work. Here we see a clear statement given by Gray that the conversion element switching tube is the source of useful work. In fact, this component was the power source for his jumping magnet experiment. It also powered televisions, radios, light bulbs, and the same component provided energy for its motor. This is the very element in which the energy was amplified and converted into cold electricity. And from now on I will call this element the electroradiant transceiver, because it both produces and receives the electroradiant effect. Even having understood all of the above, there are still a sufficient number of mysteries that need to be solved. For example, there is no mention in the drawings, or in the text, of the patent, whether the tube is in a vacuum, or whether it is filled with air or other gas. From Gray's words in the newsreel article, it is clear that he figured out how to get this effect by studying lightning. The article also states that he noticed that lightning seemed to get stronger the closer it came to the ground, and he concluded that this had something to do with more air. So perhaps there was no vacuum inside the tube. Although we know that cold electricity will not shock you, but a capacitor discharge might, so the housing around component hash 50 may have been introduced for safety reasons. These considerations lead to the following. 1. No. 50 must have contained mechanical devices to hold the components together. And 2. There may have been air inside it. We also do not know the true dimensions of this device, and we do not know the physical dimensions of the charge-receiving grids, including their length and diameter. That was the case until we examined the photographic evidence of Tom Valentine. On Fig 24, Gray demonstrates the sixth prototype of his motor at a meeting with shareholders, and color photograph located at back cover. Ed Gray is pictured at a meeting with his shareholders. In the enlarged photo from the back cover, you can clearly see its magic component. A lot of information about this device can be gleaned from this photo, in particular, the dimensions of the conversion elemental switching tube, which I now call the electro-radiant transceiver. A row of 3 conversion tubes is clearly visible, each of which is powered by a discharge from its own capacitor. 3 very large capacitors can be seen. I scanned this photo, and when I looked at the capacitor markings at maximum magnification, I saw the inscriptions 2 microfarads and 4,000 volts DC. So while Gray's motor patent specifies a battery of 18 alternately charging and discharging capacitors to power his motor, he actually used a different number. The excerpt from the circuit patent and this photograph clearly show that the motor windings received energy from the outputs of the conversion tubes, and not directly from the discharges of the capacitors. The photo shows only 1 wire going from each tube to the switch, and only 1 wire going back. It is more likely that Gray discharged the charge-receiving grids to the ground through magnetic coils. Isn't this a drain? The enlarged photograph clearly shows 2 charge-receiving grids inside the tube, at a distance of approximately 6 millimeters from each other. It is still unclear how exactly they are connected to each other. The patent states that each grid is connected to connector number 60, from which there is 1 output to the inductor. On Fig 25, Gray and Fritz Lenz in the laboratory shown is another unpublished photograph taken by Tom Valentine in Ed Gray's laboratory in 1973, showing Ed Gray and Fritz Lenz at a laboratory bench. In the foreground are the devices used to demonstrate jumping magnets. In the lower left part of the photo, there is apparently a coreless transformer, the winding of which is wound on a PVC plastic pipe with a diameter of 10 centimeters placed on some wooden blocks, Fig.26, Gray inductive load. This circuit element probably received a discharge from the conversion element switching tube and was inductively coupled to its secondary winding. It was the secondary winding that powered the magnets connected in series, causing them to fly away from each other. Gray used an air transformer to simultaneously power both magnets. He used this air transformer in the first stage because the pulse frequency was very high. A close-up view of the transformer reveals that the central winding consisted of 2 layers of 10 turns each, and was wound with what appears to be high-voltage spark plug wire. It turns out that this is Gray's inductive load. It was in this way that he used the energy from the charge-receiving grids of the conversion elemental switching tube, suitable for performing real work. But perhaps the best evidence supporting this theory is U.S. Patent number 685958, obtained by Tesla, entitled Method of Harnessing Radiant Energy. On Fig 27 Tesla radiant circuit diagram, one of the illustrations from this patent is shown. Here we see plate P, exposed to some source of radiant energy, and then discharged to Earth through the primary winding of the transformer. So this is evidence supporting the above theory of energy removal. From now on, we have enough evidence to speculate about what Gray's cold electricity circuit actually looked like. On Fig 28, probable Gray circuit diagram shows a diagram I created called Edwin Gray's probable circuit diagram of cold electricity. It is based on Gray's drawing, which includes battery number 40, multi-vibrator number 20, step-up transformer number 22, diode bridge number 24, capacitor number 16, and overload protection circuits number 42, 44, and 46. Then, again like Gray, The mechanism of electro-radiant transceiver number 34 is located, in which spark gap number 62 and resistor number 30. The vacuum triode grid is connected to a master circuit, which can generate the necessary series of pulses, with the duration of each pulse from 10 to 50 microseconds. At the output, I indicated two grids of electro-radiant transceiver numbers 34, connected to each other by a conductor. They, in turn, are connected to the primary winding of the air transformer, which at the other end is connected to ground. The secondary winding of the air transformer steps down the voltage so that incandescent lamps and other low-voltage devices can be powered. This part of the circuit is also connected to another step-down transformer, from the secondary winding of which the rectified current is sent to charge capacitor number 38. When this capacitor is charged to a voltage greater than that of battery number 18, this secondary battery will begin to charge. Overvoltage protection mechanism number 42 is shown as two separate high-voltage spark gaps, one of which, located in the main circuit, is used to extinguish the electro-radiant discharge that returns to the main circuit, and the second spark gap is used to reduce the excessive voltage in the output circuit. Regarding vacuum tube hash 28, according to Vasilatos, we know that Tesla figured out that in order to produce a non-damaging form of electricity, the pulse duration should not exceed 100 microseconds. Also, from Dr. Chalfin's statement in the newsreel article, it appears that Gray used the energy for only a tiny fraction of a millisecond. I believe you can use a pulse duration of 10 to 50 microseconds, which is 1 to 5% of a millisecond. It seems to me that this could well be considered a tiny fraction. Secondly, the number 28 vacuum tube acts like an ultrafast diode, preventing the current from reversing. As stated above, capacitor number 16 is discharged through the electro-radiant transceiver to the positive terminal of the battery. Typically, when a capacitor is discharged, the positive high-voltage charge must return to the negative pole. However, in this case, it is clearly indicated that Gray discharged his capacitor precisely through the positive terminal of the battery. Tesla explicitly stated that this was not necessary to obtain the electro-radiant effect, but Gray must have felt that it was important. The significance of this point is still unclear, but it could likely be related to his idea of splitting positive electricity, a slang term used in early articles about this technology. It is clear that this point has nothing to do with overcharging battery number 40. The voltage drop across the spark gap reduces the amount of energy that can be returned back to the battery to almost zero. So this cannot be a recharging mechanism. Apparently, by connecting the return wire to the positive terminal of the battery, Gray made the electro-radiant effect more positive. When I say positive, I mean electropositive. So now we have some idea where the term positive electricity splitting came from, and what its meaning might be. Also, Gray pointed out that he only uses the positively charged form of energy. Is it positive ion? Obviously, what produces the radiation captured by the charge-receiving grids is a positive electrostatic charge. When the pulse is discharged to ground, only the positive part of the electricity is used. Now everything Gray said makes sense. Photographic evidence on the back cover of the book confirms that the charge-receiving grids in Gray's conversion tubes are made of copper. As we said before, the electro-radiant effect creates electronic responses in various metals. Gray must have figured out that when the electro-radiant effect was captured by copper, an electronic charge was created on the receiving grids. In his large radiant energy system, Tesla decided to avoid using copper to prevent the electron pollution it created. But in Gray's smaller system, it was just what was needed. The more electro-radiant energy interacts with copper, the faster it turns into a form of electricity that can charge a battery with regular electricity. This is how Gray produced cold electricity. Summarizing all of the above, Gray's cold electricity circuit could work as follows. It starts from a battery. Then the voltage rises to 3000 V and accumulates in a large capacitor. The pulses are then discharged through a spark gap controlled by a vacuum tube so that the pulse duration is less than 50 microseconds. This intermittent sequence of pulses flows through the electroradiant transceiver, which creates a series of radiating electrostatic fields of specially distributed voltage, which are captured by the charge-receiving grids. As soon as the electroradiant effect occurs, the charge from the grids flows to the ground through the primary winding of the inductive load. The output of this recovery system is inductively coupled to this discharge primary winding, which steps down the voltage to power incandescent lamps and other medium voltage devices, and to another step-down transformer to charge the secondary battery. By periodically switching the batteries, Gray could keep the system running almost indefinitely and still generate impressive amounts of power. Now there is only one error left that needs to be fixed. In the text of the patent, Gray puts forward a theory about where excess energy enters the circuit. He states that the gain in energy that appears at the receiving grids is equivalent to the product of the current through the low voltage anode, battery #40, times the voltage across the high voltage anode, capacitor #16, which combine in a spark discharge. He writes, since the duration of the arc is very short, the instantaneous voltage and instantaneous current can be very high. The instantaneous peak energy can obviously also be very high. This is definitely not true. I've tried dozens of methods of combining voltage from one source and current from another in an attempt to create a combined energy. It didn't work out. But the best evidence that Gray didn't do this were the next two things. First, such a circuit, even if it could be created, would produce regular, hot electricity. And second, the Gray conversion tube includes a resistor between the spark gap and the battery, which prevents the possibility of unlimited current. So, Gray's explanation of the amplification mechanism cannot be true. He inserted this interpretation into the patent, either because he himself did not understand the essence of the effect, or because he believed that such an explanation would be more likely to receive the approval of the patent commission experts. Personally, I believe that Gray understood how this effect was created but did not know how to explain it. Gray's claim that he only uses 1% of the energy and 99% goes back into the battery is nothing more than a meaningless attempt to explain this phenomenon in terms of thermodynamics. In fact, all the energy in its primary circuit is just one lost capacitor #16 discharges through the spark gap, where 99% of the potential energy is lost in the voltage drop, not to mention the fact that there is no working mechanism in the discharge path that could use the pulse energy. So 100% of the incoming energy is lost, to use the terms used in ordinary work conversion. But nevertheless, something else happens instead. A series of unidirectional discharges are generated, which release a series of electroradiant effects discharged through the actual working mechanism. Work is produced that is 100 times greater than that which was lost during its receipt. If you still have doubts about the properties of the Gray chain, then the following information will help put everything in its place. On Figure 29, Electrostatic Machine Baumann Testatica features a classic photograph of the mysterious Testatica machine designed by Paul Baumann of the Metherneitha Society, located in Linden, Switzerland. Mr. Baumann indicates that he developed this device while studying lightning. It includes a high-voltage Wimshurst electrostatic machine that charges 2 capacitors, or 2 Leyden jars. The high voltage from these capacitors is applied to the top of large metal cans. Mr. Baumann does not show anyone what is inside them, and then comes out from the bottom and meets the spark gap. There have been many speculations regarding the design of his big cans, ranging from capacitors with uranium additives to a strange combination of crystals and magnets. But I maintain that these big banks are electro-radiant transceivers, and that they are not very different in design from a gray conversion tube. It is interesting to note that Mr. Baumann placed one can on each side of the spark gap. The first apparently produced a positive electro-radiant effect, and the second a negative one. You may recall that Vasilatos wrote about how Tesla, depending on the placement of the spark gap, could either pump charge onto a surface or suck charge out of the surface. This is how a balanced system could work, where the output pulses actually transferred charges from the positive electro-radiant to the negative electro-radiant surfaces, instead of only removing charge from one grid to the ground, as in Gray's system. Figure 30 Testatica works on a 1000 W lamp, clearly shows that this little Wimshurst machine is capable of producing significant lighting effects. The photo shows a 1000 W incandescent lamp. The gain here could reach 1000 to 1, not to mention the fact that the machine powered itself. All evidence supports the conclusion that Edwin Gray's cold electricity circuit operated on radiant energy and is a cousin to the devices developed by Dr. Nikola Tesla and Dr. Thomas Henry Moray. This also places them within a broad group of technologies that effectively use ether to produce useful work. This is the only explanation that is satisfied by all the evidence. To better understand etheric technologies, the researcher should study only those techniques that correlate with life-tested traditions. The other model that I have found most neat and useful is based on ideas put forward by Dr. Rudolf Steiner. The best source for studying Steiner's model of the ether is Dr. Gunther Wachsmuth's book, Etheric Formative Forces in Space, on Earth, and in Man. According to this model, there are 4 main octaves of the ether. These are the light ether, thermal ether, chemical ether, and the combination of the first 3 parts, called the life ether. Steiner describes electricity as an unnatural combination of thermal and light ether. The term unnatural simply means not found in nature. Although the terms used are slightly different, parallels can be seen between this idea and the conclusions reached by Tesla. Light ether refers to voltage, capacitance, and dielectric forces in nature, while thermal ether refers to current, resistance, and magnetic forces in nature. Longitudinal rays of the light ether are instantly transmitted to any distance, even interstellar and intergalactic. This medium is cold and is not like what is commonly called electrical resistance. This means that even Ohm's law is useless for accurately describing the behavior of a circuit in which this intermediary is present. More importantly, however, this idea relates to the great quest for so-called room temperature superconductivity. It is likely that finding the conductor with the least resistance is a false goal. The purified flow of light ether is a true superconductor at room temperature. This medium, according to Tesla, is best conducted by pure carbon, but can also be reflected by most materials with a mirror surface, silvery metals, and transparent polymer plastics. Electricity is not a monolithic entity, and it is certainly not just the movement of electrons. Tesla demonstrated that electricity can be divided into fractions of thermal and light ether. When this happens, the light ether bursts out at a right angle, leaving the heat ether behind, and extracts a large amount of energy from the environment. For modern researchers, it is obvious that the laws of thermodynamics and Maxwell's equations are not applicable to etheric technologies, and therefore do not describe all possible realities that have been achieved in the science of electricity. Besides Tesla, Gray, and Baumann, there are many other inventors who were also able to isolate ether and make it do useful work. Among them, John Worrell Keely in 1872, Nathan B. Stubblefield in 1880, Thomas Henry Moray in 1926, Victor Schauberger in the 1920s, Dr. Wilhelm Reich in 1940, and dozens of others in recent years. 50 years. Special mention should be made of Trevor Constable and Dr. Robert Adams from New Zealand. In light of this, there is ample evidence to suggest that God has been trying to provide cheap, clean energy to the people of this world in the form of etheric technology for the past 120-plus years. Time to wake up and gratefully accept the gifts of the Creator. The following are the appendices, all three. Edwin Gray, U.S. patents, knows 3,890,548, 4,595,977, 4,661,747. Nikola Tesla's three major patents. U.S. knows 593,138, 685,958, 787,412, as well as two articles by Dr. Peter Lindemann, Thermodynamics and Free Energy in 1994, and Tesla's Self-Acting Apparatus in 1995. An inquisitive researcher can find all these applications in the original of this book in English. This is where the fairy tale ends, and whoever listened, well done. The following is a translation of the back cover of the book. These are reviews about the book itself. Technological, historical, and philosophical dynamite clarifies a fundamental view of how conventional electrical technology differs from the achievements of Tesla's free genius. Trevor James Constable, researcher and writer. From my own experiments, it is clear that as soon as you separate an electron from an etheric carrier, the problem that arises is not how to produce an excessively large amount of energy, but how to limit it. Many of the peaks I obtained were well in excess of 1,000 amps. Certainly this type of circuit is real. Brian Desborough, free energy researcher. Dr. Lindemann explains Tesla's strange experiments with electricity, which, despite all my constant attention to Tesla's work, were still incomprehensible to me. On the videotape and in the book, there is a sufficient amount of general and specific information about how this device can be easily assembled by any competent person who understands electronics and electrical power circuits. Ken Rowan, Infinite Energy Magazine, January 2001. Finally, Dr. Lindemann, who has been researching free energy for a long time, got together and told us everything. This 4-part book clearly explains how Edwin Gray the Elder produced what he called cold electricity. Mr. Gray discovered that the discharge of a high-voltage capacitor could be forced to release a huge radiant electrostatic burst of energy. This energy spike is produced by his circuit and is captured by a special device that Mr. Gray calls his conversion element switching tube. The non-destructive cold form of energy emanating from this conversion tube powered all of his demonstration devices, engines, and also charged his batteries. Mr. Gray called this process splitting of positive electricity. What's even more amazing is that Dr. Lindemann found that Nikola Tesla actually discovered this effect back in 1889. With this book, you will learn what Tesla, Gray, and dozens of other researchers did. Using articles, patents, drawings, and photographs, Dr. Lindemann gradually unravels the mystery until the entire method of producing cold electricity becomes clear. Now you can do it too. This is exactly the information that all free energy enthusiasts have been waiting for.
I wanted to thank everybody for watching today. If you like this kind of content, we do a live show every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday right here on YouTube, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on the main channel. The link will be in the description. Please join us, get in the chat, and have some fun. With all that said, hit the music.
The old man will. The old man will. The old man builds. The old man builds.
The old man builds is broken in the head. People not seeing reality has put them in the red. Where conscious and spirituality been stricken from the norm and replaced with the ignorance of basic magnetic form. The geometry of God keeps running through his head. That's what makes old man builds broken in the head. The old man builds. The old man builds. Spheres of destiny are spinning in his mind, making him travel back and forth in time, battling the establishment for just a little recognition. Has him forcing the world to understand his premonition. That world will have all the technology in the end, even if it means his life will fail to instead. The old man builds. The old man builds. The old man builds. The old man